Hey guys, in this part of the tutorial we're going to learn how to program a basic attack, but first we're going to go over the format of Mugen coding. If you click this button up here, this is the characters constants file, which contains all the characters information, and everything that's coded in the character will be in this file. I've added comments again throughout it, tidied it up a little bit from Kung Fu Man's constant file, removed all his attacks, so we're going to do everything from scratch basically. You'll see this, the first thing here is the data header. That contains information about how many life points, attack points and so on the character has. I would recommend to keep everything the same, so everything to its default values, because if you say give the character life points of 9,000 and attack of 800, then your character is going to be way overpowered if it's outside of a full game. So try to leave everything the recommended values. You can always, if you're creating something like super armor or a special move that increases your attack power, then it's best you do that through the actual move itself and not universally to every move the character has. So yeah, if you just check out some of the comments I've made through these, if you need to change anything then you'll know what to do. So for example, if you want to keep your default volume high, then change it to 255, which is the maximum value. So that means when you add a sound into your character, it will play at that volume all the time unless stated otherwise. I like to keep it 0 because you can increase the volume through code anyway. So just scroll down, you'll see the size header. This is all the information about your character's size. So the X scale of the character, which is the width scaling factor, the Y scale, which is the height of your character, and so on. If you keep these normal, you can scale your character through this parameter here in your def file, which is local coordinates. But obviously if your character doesn't need scaling, then you don't need to do anything about it. You'll see things like ground, background, front. That's the width that your character has in front and behind him. So if your character is a large character like Colossus, and you have a very small front width, you can almost overlap the character if you walk into him. So just try to keep these relative to your character's size. So for Colossus you probably want to add something like 22 or 25 for both front and back. I'll actually show you what that does now. So if we give him a really small value like 10, try not to make the value too high though, so that can cause all sorts of problems.
Fight.
So yeah, he's got a value of 10 for front and back. So look how far I can walk into the character before nudging him backwards. And then obviously if you change that, say 25.
Round 1. Fight.
You'll see that it creates quite a bit of width there. Obviously I can walk through him at the moment because I don't have no walking animation or collisions, but yeah, try and keep it at a decent value. Same with the air front and air back. That is when jumping, the width in front and behind. Scroll down a little bit more, the rest is self-explanatory, but you rarely need to use any of those parameters. As the velocity, this is something that you will need to use. The walk forward speed, walk backward speed. Notice for the walk backward speed there's a minus sign, which obviously reverses the velocity. Run forward speeds. So change these all to suit your character. Scroll down, you'll see movement. To get rid of Kung Fu Man's double jump, you just change the air jump, which is the number of air jumps allowed, to 0. So you haven't got that awkward double jump if you don't require it. This one's important. It's your character's, basically your character's gravity, which is the vertical acceleration. So this applies how much force or gravity force that your character has when coming down for a jump. Again, adjust that to your needs. You never want to go higher than like 0.58 or something like that. It all depends on how your character looks when jumping and how you want it to act. As for the rest of them, I wouldn't even bother changing those. Just leave everything as it is. There's comments there if you are curious to what it does, but I never use them anyway. One thing in Mugen 1.0, there's a quote system now, so when you win a match it will go to the default win screen and play a victory quote. So if you want to give your character a quote, just make sure it's inside the quote marks, which is a string value, and then that will play when your victory string appears. Another thing you'll notice is a few numbers on this side, like 170 says lose by time over. What these are states, and a state is a container of information that Mugen reads and executes when told to. These ones, however, are hard-coded anyway, so you'll see state def 170, that means state definition or state define 170. Which is your lose by, if the time's run out and your character loses, it will go into this state, which is obviously hard coded into the engine. And then there's a set of code inside there, which I'll explain in a second. You have things like your win poses, your character's introduction, character's taunt, and then obviously when you code basic attacks, they'll all follow that as well. You'll notice another file that you have, and another tab which says common1.cns, which is your character's common file. It's in every single data folder of Mugen, and all of these are your common states. So all of these states are hard coded into Mugen to work properly, and every character has them. For example, your stand-in state, walk in, jump in, your get hit states, which are required, so I'd leave those alone. But if you do need to override any of these states, all you do, because your character has a copy in the template folder, you can just override it here, and if you need to add a sound, etc., just add it in this state or these states. Otherwise, if you don't have a common file and you're not using the template, if you scroll down to this bit, you'll see override common states, and you can use this section here to override any states that you need to. Anyway, what I'll do now is, you're probably hearing all these words like states and thinking what the hell are they, so I'll explain the format of Mugen coding. So obviously you know what a state is. It's a container of information that Mugen reads and executes. Now the format of that, how a state looks, is you have two brackets, open and closed, the word state def, space, and then you'll have a number. So if we want to program a basic attack, we would need to give that a number that doesn't already exist. So what I like to do is, I like to go by a format of, I'll just show you a notepad. For basic attacks, I like to use a set amount of group numbers for my basic attacks. So for all my stand-in basics, which if it's a 6-button character there'd be 6 attacks, I'd like to start my stand-in light punch on state 200 and obviously stand-in medium punch 210, 220 for hard, 230 for light kick, 240 for medium kick, and 250 for hard kick. I like to follow that kind of format when adding in my attacks, and I'd obviously use the same animation numbers as these as well. I mean, you don't have to start that. You can start at 200, 201, 203, or you could start at 300. It's entirely up to you, but I like to follow that myself. So I'd give it a state def of 200 for my first attack. So what you've done now is you've defined a new state, so you've defined state 200 there. But that's now what you need to do is add some lines of code that tell Mugen what kind of state it is. One of the first parameters that are in a state def is type. So need to put an equals sign as well. So type equals, and there's different types of state defs that you can have. If you go to the Mugen documentation folder, or actually I can provide a link in the video description because I've uploaded it onto my site, which is here. If you scroll down and go to the CNS Format, click on that, and it will show you all the different parameters that you can have. So if you click on type, it will tell you all the types of state defs that you can have. If you give that a little bit of a read, you might understand it a little bit more, but what I'll explain anyway. So the types that you have, I'll just press semicolon here so I can comment the coding line out. You have an S type, which is a stand-in type state. You have an A type, which is a jump-in or an air type state. C, you have a crouching type state, so that's obviously used for crouching punches and stuff. You have a U type state, which is unchanged. So if you're changing states to another one and you want them to keep the same type that was from the previous state, then you just use the unchanged state type. I'll explain a bit more later on what that does and how you can do that, but basically that's all you need to know and read the documentation to explain a little bit more. Because mine's a standing basic attack, I'm going to use S, so it's a standing type attack, or state def rather. The next line is move type. There's various move types. There are A for attacking, I for an idle move type, which means usually an idle move type is something like walking, or if your attack frames have passed in your attack, then the state becomes, or the move type becomes idle after that. There's also H for get hit, which is if your character's hit in Mugen, it immediately goes into the state 5000s, and the move type becomes H for get hit. So you're in a hit state. You're in a hit type state. But for this one, because I'm making an attack, it's going to be A. Also, sorry, there is U for unchanged. Next line is physics. This is what type of physics to apply to the state. There's quite a few here. There's S for standing physics, C for crouching physics, A for physics in the air. A also means if you're in the air and your physics are A, it also applies gravity, so your character will descend after a certain amount of time. Or there's N for neutral physics or no physics, which means that no gravity will be applied during this move. What that can be used for is if your character has a dragon punch, you want to apply no physics, so the character doesn't descend too quickly, and then during that state you can apply auto gravity or a certain amount of gravity after a certain amount of time's expired to bring your character back down again. But I'll show you how to do that in another tutorial, but for now we're just going to use S for standing physics. I think you can use U for physics as well as unchanged from the previous state. The next line is a common line, which is vel set. That basically sets your character's velocity in that state, because we're only going to do a standing punch I'm going to keep the X and Y X and Y values as 0, so there's going to be no movement during this attack. Obviously, if you want to make your character move forward a little bit, then you can give it a low value, which will move horizontally, and the Y value will move vertical. But yeah, I'm not going to move my character, so I'm going to leave it the default value. The next line is anim, which obviously is self-explanatory. It's your character's animation number. You might want to set that up if you haven't already. I have my, if you noticed in the template, standing light punches set at 200, which I'm going to use for the state def as well. I'm going to add my sprites in. The reason why I haven't added all the sprites to the animation is because there's two different attacks here, but obviously you'll know which sprites to add yourself. So you want to set that animation up if you haven't already. If you have, then you might want to skip this bit, but I'm just going to quickly set my character up to punch. So there you go, my character's punching now, and I'm just going to quickly add some collision boxes on. So we're going to use that as the attack frame, so you need a red collision box on that. Right, so obviously I'm going to use animation 200 for my attack. The next line, a common line, is control, CTRL, and you want to give that a value of 0. If you had control in this state, then you can break the state by moving out of it. Say if you're about to punch and then you press forward, you'll automatically walk forward and come out of the state, which isn't really ideal. So always keep control 0 in attack states. Another one is SPR and then priority, which is the sprite priority, and it tells Mugen whether to draw your sprites in front or behind player 2 in this state. So the higher the number, the more chance your sprites have of being drawn in front of player 2. So I always, for attacking states, I always use 2. Another common line is power add. You don't have to add all of these lines, but it's recommended you add at least the first 6, I'd say. Power add is if your character gains any power when entering the state. So for light punch, I'm going to give it a value of 0. And obviously if you add, say, 100, then 100 points of power will get added to your character's power meter when entering this state. Another line is face player 2 equals 1. When you're attacking, you want your character to face player 2, else they'll be punching the other way if player 2 jumps over your head. So that's another common line, but again, that's optional. There's a line as well that's common called juggle. That sets the amount of juggle points for this move for your character, but as far as I'm aware, Mugen's juggle system is buggy at the moment, so I like to use my own juggle system, but I'll show you that in another tutorial. You can leave that line out or give it some juggle points, but right now let's leave that out, and we'll cover that in another tutorial. So this is the info that you've given Mugen, and it's telling Mugen exactly what type of state it is and all the information from that. Currently this state will run when you tell it to, but there's no end to it, so what you want to do is end that state when you tell Mugen to end it. So if you look on the right hand side, there's a list of quite a lot of words. All these is state controllers, so they're controllers in the state, and they do all different kinds of things. So to end a state, you'll want to find the word change state. Double click that, you'll see a line of code. It'll tell you state 0 This is by default, but you might want to change it to the number of your state. So state 200, and you'll see it's labeled change state. Uncomment all the grayed out code. You'll notice as well, you might want to read the documentation for this, that there's a line called trigger. Now what a trigger is basically what triggers that state controller. So when do we want this state to end? We want it to end after the attack animation's finished. So what we'd do is, if you look at your animation, after this frame 6, you'd want the animation to finish. So we use a trigger called anim time. So it's when your animation time equals 0. So it's when your animation time's finished, then you want to change state and end the current state that you're in. There's quite a lot of triggers in Mugen, so again you might want to read the Mugen documentation. Value is what state number to change to once you've ended this current state, and we always want to go back to stance after our standing attacks. So you'd press 0, because in the common file state 0 is your standing state. You'll see the line control again like we had in the state def. You want to change the value 0 to 1, because once you change back to your standing state, you want to give your player back control again. You can delete the line anim because it's not really needed, and so this is the basic format of a Mugen state. Right now I'll show you how that works. At the moment the move won't attack player 2 because we need a state controller called a hit def, and I'll show you how to do that in a sec. But right now we're going to set up the attack first, just to see it working and see if we're happy with it. So you want to go to this section, which is commands. Again, I've commented through the command file. This is where you add all your characters' commands like special moves, super moves, but there will be some default commands already, which is like ABC, XYZ, start. So these you don't need to define already because they're already in, but you do need to tell Mugen when you press that button what state does it go to. And what you do is you find state def -1 here, which is your state entry for your commands. Make a space underneath it because you need to add everything change state wise underneath the state def, the -1 state def. So what we do is, if you add a comment and type standing light punch, make a space underneath it, open and close the brackets. In between that you want to type state -1, add a little comma, space, and again standing light punch. You can copy and paste this once you add more attacks. This is just to start out. Type is a change state type like we saw in the previous state. The value, we want to go to state 200, which is the standing light punch. And what triggers this? So trigger 1 equals, and we want to, our standing light punch will be, or it should be set out as X. So if you scroll up you'll see X is already defined, but notice that it's in between a string value, and that's how Mugen recognizes your command triggers. So the trigger of this move will be the command, which is light punch command. So command equals open and close quotes and your type X. So command equals X in between a string value. So when you press X, it will go straight into state 200, which is this, and it will read that information and execute it. That's not all you want to leave it. You don't want to leave it as that though, because you want to tell Mugen what type of state this move must be done in. So if you type state type equals A, it will allow you to do that move when you're in the air, and it will be a bit glitchy and you'll be standing in mid-air after the attack's finished because you've asked Mugen to send you back to the standing state once the animation's finished. So what you want to do is give it a state type of S. The reason why you don't want to give it a state type of C is because if you're holding down and pressing X, you might go into your crouching state after the animation's finished. So leave it as S for a standing state type. Add another trigger, trigger 1 again. If you notice, they're all trigger 1s because I want these 3 rules to apply at once. If you want to add something like add this move in a combo, you'd add trigger 2 equals blah blah blah, and I'll show you how to do that in a sec as well. You want to make sure your character has control before attacking, so control trigger 1 equals control. So that basically reads now as change to state 200 when you've pressed X when your character's in a standing state type and when the character has control. You can optimize this code by adding the following, which is after your command trigger. If you put 2 AND symbols, the state type equals S, and again 2 AND symbols and control, that shortens your code and does exactly the same thing. So if we load up Mugen now,
Round 1. Fight.
and press X, you'll notice the character obviously punches, but nothing's happening, and that's because we need to add a hit def into our state. So if we save that and go back into the coding file, in between the change state, double click on hit def. You might notice your hit def to have quite a number of parameters, maybe even longer than mine. That's because I've edited my hit def in Fight Factory by clicking on hit def and the notepad button and getting rid of any unnecessary parameters that I don't need. You can just copy these ones that I have here for mine, or if you need additional parameters, then read through the Mugen documentation and it'll explain what each parameter does. The first thing in a hit def obviously is the state number, so you want to make that 200, and it explains to Mugen or yourself that it's a hit def. I mean, you can call this what you want. You can call this attack info. It doesn't really matter. It's more adding notes for yourself, and you can also add some comments as well. You know, just to make it easier for yourself. What would be the trigger of this hit def? Well, the trigger would be the attack frame, because that's the frame that does the damage, and this is the information for that attack frame. So if you go back to your attack and look for your red hitbox, so mine's on frame 4, the trigger for this, which is a frame trigger, is anim and then LM, which stands for animation element, and then mine was on frame 4, so you'd type number 4 in. There's other ways to trigger a hit def, and if your character has multiple hit frames, but you won't, like say for example you want the move to hit on this frame as well, but you want the attack to only be 1 hit, what you'd do is type time equals 0, or you can add time like that with an exclamation point, which stands for pretty much the same thing. This time equals 0 means the exact start when the state happens. So if you get to this frame and there's a red hitbox, it will instantly, if that hitbox makes contact with player 2, then that will be where the hit is dealt. If that frame's already passed and you make contact with player 2 with this frame, then it would hit on that frame. So that's when you use time equals 0 if you have multiple hitboxes but you only want the attack to hit once. So I'm going to use mine, which is animation frame 4. The next line is ATTR, which stands for your hit def attributes. Again, read Mugen documentation for this because there's quite a lot to explain on it. The first value you'll notice is S by default, which is standing, and it's separated by a comma. It's separated by a comma and it says NA afterwards. That means normal attack. So the hit def attributes are standing, normal attack. What this is used for is it tells Mugen what type of attack it is or what type of hit def it is, but also if your character has a move reversal and it can reverse, say, standing normal attacks, then this is the line that it would read from your opponent's hit def and reverse that attack, so it's quite important. Again, if you go into the Mugen docs, go to the state controller reference, you can find hit def on there, and it'll tell you, it'll explain pretty much all the parameters and what they do. You'll notice that the ATTR is here, the hit attribute. You can use S for standing, crouching, air, and then normal attack, special attack, hyper or super, and then A for attack, T for throw, P for projectile, and so on. So if this attribute said C, NT, that would mean crouching, normal throw. So you'd adjust it to what suits your attack. So we're going to leave ours for a standard normal attack as SNA. The hit flag is how and where your attack will hit player 2. So defaults are MAF, which means it can hit the player from a mid-level, which is standing or crouching. A for air, so it can hit the player in the air, and F for falling, so this move can hit player 2 when they're in a falling state or have been knocked off their feet. Adjust these to suit your character's gameplay system, but I like to keep it as M for so it can't hit, MA, so it can't hit any falling opponents. I usually keep falling moves or moves that can hit falling opponents for special moves and super moves. Guard flag, just go back to the hit flag again. There's another parameter which is D, so that means the move can hit a downed opponent as well. Guard flag's exactly the same as hit flag, but how the move can be guarded. If you don't want the move guardable, then just remove that line. If you want the move to be guarded in the air only, then you'd press A or H, which means guard the move high. That means that you can't guard this move low, you can only guard it standing, or and so on. Again, read the Mugen documentations to explain it a little bit better than I did. Anim type, that is the animation type to play for your when the character's hit. So if I open my character that I've already done, which is Colossus, go into group 5000, you'll see that it says light for group 5000, 5001 medium, 5002 hard. It basically tells Mugen which animation of these to play when hit by the attack. So it's a light punch, so I want to play a light animation type. So I'll keep this light. Priority is the priority of the attack. So Obviously a lower priority trading with an attack with higher priority has less chance of hitting. You'll notice the value hit as well. If there's two types, there's hit and miss. For if your character has a throw, then it's usually a miss type priority. This is an attack, so we're going to use hit priority. Leave the number 4 to the default value, but again, you can view the docs to explain a little bit better than I did. Damage is self-explanatory, but there's two values. The first value is how much the damage the move actually does. So it's up to you what you give your character, but I like to use a set amount of damage through all light attacks, all medium attacks, and all strong attacks. So I'm going to use like 45 for now. Now your character's life is 1,000, so it will be 45 life points off of that 1,000 that your character has, which isn't too much for a light punch. The second value is, I like to leave this as 0, but it's your chip damage, so how much chip damage the move does, or whatever, but I like to leave that as 0. The pause time is the amount of hits done before your character gets pushed back once the move attacks. So again, I like to use set values for these. Common values are 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12. I like to use around 9 for a light attack, or 8, 10 for a medium attack, and 12 for a strong attack. For specials and supers you can increase this, but there's two values. The value is for player 1 and the second value is for player 2. So obviously you want to keep it the same so it's fair. So there you go. Spark number, that is if you've already got hit sparks for your character and you've added them into your sprite file, like I have, then you'd set them up in the animations folder and add them in to the spark number parameter there. There is a tutorial that I'm going to be doing for if using high-res hit sparks or using hit sparks as helpers. I'll explain that in another tutorial, but today what we're going to use is the default Mugen hit sparks, which I think if you scroll up you'll see is, yeah, default hit spark number for hit deaths is 2. To see what kind of hit sparks are in the default Mugen, if you click this plus sign and click OK for an empty character project, go to Sprites Open and go into your Mugen folder. Into the data folder, then find FightFX, which is the FightFX sprite file. Open it up. It will show you what type of hit sparks you have in your Mugen file. You can change these yourself as well. Open up the animations. So the same process. FightFX animation file. So you'll see the animation number 0 is for a light spark. So going back to your character, where it says spark number, if you just press 0, it will play that light hit spark from your Mugen screen pack. So we're going to leave it as that. You might want to look at what the guard spark is though. So that comes under 40. So where it says guard.spark number, you press 40 if you want to use Mugen's default. The SparkXY is the alignment of your hit spark. It's a bit of trial and error, this one, because you can't get the hit spark spot on. If you have a copy of the hit spark in your sprite file, then you can press this button, which is the offset viewer. You'd find the animation number for your hit spark, which would show on this side, and then you'd position it to the character and release the sprite, and it will show you X and Y coordinates, and that would be your SparkXY numbers that you would add. But I like to use a little bit of trial and error, so I like to guess. Commonly it's positioned at -10, so it's -10 pixels away from player 2, and depending on the height of your character, mine pretty much punches near the chest, so I'm going to give it a value of -70. It's usually, I think it's usually -76 is the default value for a light punch, but we're going to do a bit of trial and error here. Currently we don't have a hit sound, or if you've made if you've added your sounds into your file already, then just make note of the numbers. I'll show you how to add a sound as well. If you want to go back to the screen pack, open the common sound file, which is that one. That's Mugen's default hit sound. So if we use the first sound, which is for a light punch, you'll see group 5 index 0. Go back to your hit def and you'll see hit sound. If you press 5,0, it will play that sound once the move connects. If it's a sound from your character's sound file, then use an S before the numbers, so that means play group 5 sound 0 from your character's sound file. If it is from a screen pack, you can take away the S, or you can use an F, which also means from your screen pack sound file. The guard sound would be obviously finding the guard sound, which would be 6. Whoops, I've done that in the wrong one. There you go. So that will now play that guard sound when player 2 guards the attack. Ground type, that is, it tells Mugen when hit what type of animation to play. So I think there's there's 3 actually. There's low and trip. If this move hits player 2 low, or in the stomach, or in the legs, then you want to add a low ground type, so it plays the correct animation that matches the attack. Trip would be used for if the attack's a sweep type attack, and it would play, let's load up my character and I'll show you what animation it would play. It would play animation 5070, which is your character's trip animation. That's also hard coded, so it will know exactly what what animation number to play. So we're going to keep this as a ground type of high, because it's a punch, what's supposed to be a punch to the face. Same for it when your character's hit in the air. Obviously trip wouldn't apply here. Another important one is ground slide time. This is how many game ticks your opponent slides back for after the pulls of the hit. Ground hit time would be exactly the same, but how many game ticks the opponent is in a hit state for. So this is good for things like following up with another attack, which would lead into a combo. So the hit time would vary. Again, you can use a set amount of values for light attacks, medium attacks and strong attacks, which I like to do. The ground velocity is the velocity of player 2 sliding back when hit. Again, you can use set values for this. There's a X and Y value that's available. I like to use -6 for a light attack. Depending on your character's gameplay system, you would increase or decrease this. but if you use say -1, it would feel like you're hitting a brick wall and player 2 wouldn't move back that much. So it's a really good idea to use decent values, so when you hit player 2 they get knocked back far enough and it would look like a decent attack. If you add a Y value here, what would happen is player 2 would get knocked off. They wouldn't get knocked off their feet, but they'd travel upwards and backwards and then recover and land. This is for like launching a type attacks in Marvel versus Capcom, where you'd knock the opponent up in the air, then they'd recover and come back down again. But this is only a standing punch, so we're not going to do that. Guard velocity is when you guard the attack, how much do you get pushed back when guarding. I always like to keep this similar to the ground velocity. I think if you leave that line out, it uses the ground velocity values as a default value. I like to add mine in anyway, just in case I want to increase the velocity. Air velocity is if you're hitting the air with this move, how far does it knock you back? Again, the values are up to you, you might want to mess around with that. And same for the air guard velocity. There's a couple of others, which is get power. So when you hit player 2, how much power do you gain from when you land the attack? So again, the values are entirely up to you. There's two values. One is if you hit player 2, how much power do you get, and if player 2 guards it, how much power do you get as well. So that's like, it's kind of like chip damage but for power, but it applies to you, not to player 2. This part applies to player 2, which is give power. So give power if hit by the move, and give power if they guard the move. Again, the values are entirely up to you. So that's our basic hit def. There's a lot of other parameters we can add. If the move knocks player 2 off their feet, you'd add the parameter fall equals 1, and player 2 will be sent into a falling hit state. If you want them to be able to recover, you'd type fall.recover equals 1. If you don't want them to be able to recover, then you'd obviously leave it as 0. There's other things like fall.recover time, and if your full recover parameter is 1, then you can tell Mugen how many game ticks player 2 has to recover before falling to the ground. But as this is a standing punch, we're not going to add that. I will do a tutorial on adding additional parameters like palette effects and screen shake, but for now we're just going to keep it simple. That's our hit def set up. If we test it in Mugen now, the attack should work.
Round 1. Fight.
There you go. So the attack works perfectly. Obviously player 2 doesn't play any type of animation at the moment, and that's just purely because I haven't set up any of the animations for this template, but you should have. Another thing just to note that you should be adding as well is, if you scroll down to find the state controller, state typeset, what you want to do is after frame 4 has passed, which is the attack frame, or any attack frames passed, make note of which is the last attack frame in your animation. So mine would be 5 is when the attack frame ends. You'd want to delete this code and just leave in state type. Sorry, not state type, you want to leave in move type. You want to change the move type to I, which means the attack now becomes idle after the attack frame's passed, which is frame 5 in this case. What that does is it changes your state def's move type to I, which is idle, when the attack frame's passed, and it also stops any unnecessary guarding from the computer, because they'd still think you're in an attacking move type. So that's an important one to add. Another thing to add as well that you might want to do is any sort of wind sound when you're punching. So I'll show you how to do that quickly. If you go into your sound file, you should have some wind sounds. So I'm going to use the first one, which is group 0 index 0. On the right hand side you'll find play sound or play SND. Double click that. That can go above or below the hit def, it doesn't really matter. What you want to trigger it is when you want the sound to play. So I want to play it probably just before the attack frame, which is frame 3, so that would be my trigger. Anim elem equals 3, and from the sound file you'll need an S, play index sound, sorry, group 0 sound 0. The volume, you'll see volume scale, 0 would be completely muted, 255 would be loudest. I always like to play mine the loudest, so you'd leave that in. Channel, that would be if your character has multiple sounds but you don't want them to overlap each other, then you'd give it a channel between say 1 and 7. But for this attack we don't need a channel. Also, another thing that I'll explain that we went through earlier with ignore hit pulls. If you want your wind sound to play on the exact frame as your attack frame, you'd need a parameter called ignore hit pulls equals 1. What that does is, as soon as your hit lands, it doesn't wait for the hit pulls to be over before it plays that sound. It will ignore it and play that sound anyway, regardless of that. If you left this as 0, your wind sound wouldn't even play until the hit's over, because you've got the same sound frame as your attack frame. So just bear that in mind. But ours is way before the attack, so we don't need to worry about that. So let's try it again.
Round 1. Fight.
So you'll notice now our punch has a sound, and when it attacks it plays the hit sound as well. So that's the end of this tutorial. What you should have learnt by now is the basic format of Mugen coding, what a state is, and what a state controller is. If you're still unsure, a state controller is this, which is play sound, it's this, which is a hit def, and it's all of these on the right hand side. The state def just defines a new state and has the code and tells Mugen what type of state it is, and it's also a container of information that Mugen reads and executes. So thanks for watching this tutorial, and I will be doing a lot more tutorials on getting you more comfortable in coding and explaining a lot of what these state controllers do, and I'll also be doing tutorials on special moves, super moves and other stuff. Thanks for watching.